Good morning, Spencer County. This is Melissa. I have kind of a non-podcast, if you will. So let me explain. I had the privilege of being invited to the Spencer County Historical Society's monthly meeting, and it happened to be at one of the historical homes here in Spencer County. So I was definitely very interested because I love, old architecture, and I kind of went there with the intention of just documenting the building so that I could maybe make a video from Main Street, even though the house is not on Main Street, but it's still a very significant piece of historical property in our county, so I thought it would be really interesting to document. So the name of the property is Vaucluse, and it is owned by Sean and Vicki Gleason, who are residents here in Spencer County. They have purchased the property, and they are in the process of restoring it to its original historical integrity and glory. So after they got through with a little meeting business, before they gave us the tour, Sean and Vicki did a little presentation kind of telling us about the property and honestly about how this county was settled, which I had no idea that we were even going to get into. But when Sean stood up, something just told me, Melissa, turn your camera on. Something special is about to be told here. And I'm so glad that I did, and I'm so glad that I can share this with you. So while it's not a flowy conversation like our podcasts normally are, if you have any interest in Spencer County history, I think you're going to find this one really interesting. And if you don't yet have interest in Spencer County history, you just might after this.
So since January of 2022, Vicki and I have been working on this project of restoring Vaucluse and the dependent buildings. And as I was busy working on the rocks over here where the cabin is, that's what I'd like to be able to show you tonight. There's a light on in it, and we can use our lights to go around to it. I would always ask myself the question, how did we get here? And what is the significance of this place and Spencer County? And what's become very clear is that this building we're in and this property is directly related to the Revolutionary War and the whole American experience of self-government. And it turns out that much of this county is in the same situation that we've come to learn through the efforts of American 250 Group and the documents from the Historical Society and other documents that Vicki and I have been searching for as we've gone to Pennsylvania to look at the origins of this house and other references from the Filson Club and other documents that are historical in nature from the various county courthouses. So what we want to do is just spend a couple minutes talking about this place, how we got here, what's the significance, and I'll start it out and then turn it over to Vicki. Ways I organize it in my mind are around the whole business of the charter, the double cross, and the resolution. This is the way I think of it, and I welcome you to add to it or take away from it, but this is the way I think of it, and this is the way I think of why was this place such an important piece in the American Revolution? We weren't the ones complaining about taxation without representation, although that's what you always hear, and that was a true statement. The issue here was not about taxes. How could you find us? We're out in the woods. There's no road. There's no railroad. There's just a buffalo trail and some rivers and streams. So how does that work for us here? This had to do with the double cross and why people were fired up and were ready to turn against the king, because in their estimation, and I think their estimation is exactly right, the king double-crossed us. That's what happened. And here's why. It all starts with the charter. What was the charter? The Virginia Charter. What was the Virginia Charter? Well, in 1606, Virginia had already been named after the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. 1685, Sir Walter Raleigh says, hey, I want to name a colony after you because, well, we better do something, because in 1608, the French had already named Quebec as the capital of the French territory, which they'd already claimed back in 1534 as all of this area. Where we're sitting right now in 1534, the French claimed. And what they claimed was everything west of the Alleghenies and everything east of the Rockies. And it circled around and came down south around northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, Georgia. Everything below that was Florida. French had all the inland. England was over here on the coast, and the Dutch were up there in New York and the Hudson River area. But the French came in on the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Spanish had already claimed the west coast and Florida by 1513. So you have the Spanish first, then the French, then the French make a capital in Quebec City, and then the next year the English say, you know, we got to rethink this. We need to make a colony that's belonging to England. So that they did, and they created the second Virginia Charter. The first one was in 1606 and was about put a bunch of money together, let's go try to do something. 1609 they redid it, and it was based on what all the people in England believed and knew was the case. It was British law for over 400 years, and that was the Magna Carta. In 1215, the Magna Carta is established. King John was a terrible king. He was awful. And Stephen Wagner and the other noblemen come together and say, you know what? We have to own our own property. We can't put up with this king stuff running off and just running over us. We have to own property. The House of Lords happens and all this that you're all well aware of. So the established law of England is there are rights of the individual for self-determination of their property. The purpose of the king is to defend it. So have a good navy. We'll pay you taxes. You defend our property. That was the genius business model of the British Empire. And it's why it succeeded over the Spanish and the French, because everybody had a stake in it. Well, along comes the double cross. The double cross happens when the French and Indian War, because the French and Indian War happened because the Indians were already fighting, and the Shawnee and the Algonquin tribes had gone against the Iroquois. The Iroquois sided up with the British, and the others had sided up with the French. Most were on the side of the French. And what happened with that charter was that England claimed for the Commonwealth of Virginia all the land from the Atlantic to the other ocean. The other ocean belonged to Spain. They had no idea how far apart it is. Spain had already claimed it, but the King of England said, you know what, we're taking all that. Well, they name it, but they realize they don't really have it because the French were in the way in the middle. So the French and Indian War happens, and the Iroquois defeated the Shawnee. Well, the Shawnee were the Indians that were local around Ohio. They were long enemies of the Iroquois way before the Europeans showed up. And the Iroquois sided with the British, defeated all these French proxies, and that war got settled in 1793. And when the English won, herein comes the double cross. The double cross is that the Virginians have been led to believe through their charter, which had been established in 1609, that they themselves had the right to divide up the land and govern the land, determine how it will be taxed, divided, who owns what, and it's all about purchases and everybody owns their property, consistent with the Magna Carta. Well, when 1763 happens, King George III of England says, you know what, I'm taking this all back. I'm buying this from the Iroquois. The Iroquois were willing sellers. They sold the Kentucky lands, and he said, none of you frontiers people can come on the other side of the Alleghenies. So whatever you all have done in the legislature doesn't count. Sorry. Well, that's a direct violation of the Magna Carta. And those were the fighting words. And that's why everybody here said, wait a minute, this is a huge double cross. We're going to war. And why did they say that? Because they had listened to their granddaddies tell about how they had to leave the old country. And if you were someone from Britain, you already been run out on a rail because you had a different religion than the king. And they were all fighting over the king of the church and the pope of the church, and who's on first and who's on second, and they had enough of it, and they were on the outs. And if you were on the outs with the king, you never were going to be anybody. So off they go. Meanwhile, those of French and German descent, if you were a French speaker or a German speaker, you'd already been hiding out in Switzerland because you'd been run out on a rail by the Edict of Nantes being reversed by King, the Bourbon King, Louis XIV. Louis XIV reverses the Edict of Nantes, so now if you're not on the in with his religion, you're going to be confiscated and lose your life. So all these Protestants leave. Well, the grandfather of this builder, Jacob Yoder, he was one run out, and he led the family over to Pennsylvania. And like everybody else that came, they came down from Philadelphia and went through the southern part of Pennsylvania into the Shenandoah Valley, came down to the Cumberland Gap, and came through the Buffalo Trail called the Wilderness Road. And here they're hearing about some guy in England telling you that the whole deal from the Magna Carta to the Charter in '69 doesn't count anymore. And what they're saying is, we left all that and you don't count anymore. So that's the deal. So that's the way the fight goes out here in the frontier. And the English had hired the Shawnee, who had been the losers of the Iroquois, to come down and capture and bring back to Detroit, where the governor was for the English as a capture, or bring back their scalp, and we'll pay you one buckskin. And that's what put the Shawnee Indians at odds with the frontiersmen who were coming down here. They didn't live here. This was the hunting ground, but it had been sold to the English through Virginia in 1763, and the Shawnee had no claim because they had lost, and they had sided with the French. So that's how that was settled. So the double cross, it was a big deal with that Treaty of Fort Stanwix that happened in 1768. There was a skirmish in '69, and it was a prelude to the Revolutionary War that happened then in the events leading up to 1776. What happens here then, the resolution, is that in 1773 through 75, you have early explorers coming in that included people that, descendants of whom you met just the other day. Mr. Carlin, for example, his forefather, Thomas Carlin, was one of the ones that was coming in with John Floyd. He was in a different company with Daniel Boone. The man in whose house you're sitting right now, he grew up in the farm next to Daniel Boone. So Daniel Boone was from Pennsylvania, Berks County, Pennsylvania. His family fled England over certain issues, and Johannes Yoder fled over similar issues, but different, but all the same idea: the king's after us, and we got to get out of here. And they became successful farmers, lived right next door, and Daniel Boone went his way, got hitched up with Judge Henderson, and in 1775, Judge Henderson bought Kentucky from the Cherokee through the money that came much out of New York and the Transylvania Company. The Transylvania Company was recognizing the Cherokee's claim on this as a hunting ground, but this is more down in southeast Kentucky, not right here. This was more Iroquois territory for hunting grounds, but they all used the same Buffalo Trail. So it turned out that because the other deal was sooner in time, 1609 to 1763, all the colonists recognized that lineage. So if you didn't have your claim set up in Williamsburg, Virginia, it didn't count. That's why Daniel Boone left with nothing except a bunch of scars. So the resolution led to different individuals who listened to the people in Virginia, the legislators, saying, you know, we're not listening to the king. We need to raise money for the Continental Army. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to continue to sell land, and in this case, land warrants for the real estate that's over here in this new place called Kentucky. And the way they arranged that was through Virginia law that they passed in 1780. George Washington and the Continental Congress had just put together the Army Corps of Engineers just before that, and the idea was that the folks would be able to come out and survey and make land warrants, and Virginia then could raise money from speculators to pay the soldiers to fight the British. And cleverly enough, that would also then incentivize all the investors. Whose side are you on? Well, you really know what someone believes when you know where they put their money. Talk is cheap, but money's real, and when you put your money here, it means that's what you believe. Doesn't matter what you say. That's what you believe, because you put your money there. And so that was the motivation of all these individuals on the East Coast and the colonies saying, look, 1780, the war's not over. It's not clear that the colonies are going to win, but I'm willing to bet on it. So we know about the fella that was named Shepherdsville. He bought a bunch of warrants. It doesn't mean he owned the land, but he had the right to develop the land. He bought those in 1780. We also know that there's a fella that was named Flynn, F-L-Y-N, who bought warrants. Same time, I don't know if he was working with Shepherd. This is a question we need to know. But the idea is they bought that in 1780 that then allowed other individuals to come along later, and the later it did. In 1783, when the Paris Peace Treaty is signed, the war is over, and the United States wins against England. Those warrants now are worth something, and that's when you start seeing transactions happening. So we have a land warrant, 1784, that happens on this property, and it's a warrant that then becomes perfected as a deed with a survey in 1791, and then the deed being granted in 1793. And then it was sold to Jacob Yoder in 1801, and then it was sold to us in 2022, right? So anyway, it's hard to keep all these dates straight. But the idea is that these things got resolved, and what we know about this whole area is everything was under a land warrant here pretty much. And the whole thing is, how do you get your property back to that 1783, 84, 85 period? And whatever information you have on that, that's what I would think would be a very useful thing to all of us here. And I wanted to turn it over to Vicki to bring you up to speed on all the things that happened around this with the work that she's been up to. And I know Terry and Bonnie and others have been working on with Robbie. So Vicki?
As Sean said, whenever we first got the property and the house, and we were trying to do some research on what are the origins of this land, and what we found out is that everyone would tell us, well, this was part of Peter Shepard's warrants. And so what we know about Peter Shepard, as Sean said, is that he owned a lot of grist mills up around Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He was a very, very wealthy man. He sold those grist mills, and he took a lot of that money and he invested in warrants. So he really bet. He took a huge risk, but he bet that the Americans, that the colonists would win. And so when they did win, what you find is that about that same time, and then another key piece is that his son, Adam Shepard, was in the Corps of Engineers. So whenever George Washington started the Corps of Engineers, a key place to be was to be in the Corps of Engineers. So you've got Peter Shepard owning all of these warrants. He sits in Bucks County. His son is now in the Corps of Engineers, and his son comes out here and he's starting to survey. And so everyone kept telling us, oh, well, all of this area in here is part of the Peter Shepard warrants. And so I sort of took that for face value, and then I kept looking, and I really went down this rabbit hole where I was thinking, there must have been a station here. There must have been a fort here. Wasn't there any in the confines of what would have been Spencer County? Didn't we have, a station? And I made all of these calls. I talked to all these folks. I did all this research. The only thing I could find was Kenchlow Station, which is over at Nelson County in that area. And apparently, a number of years ago, there was a debate about whether Kenchlow Station was actually in Spencer County or Nelson County. And somewhere or another, Spencer County kind of gave up. I think we should go back and look at this. So I'm here to tell you a few things that I want to go back and look at now that we have this land and now that I've done this research. So I think we need to go back and re-examine Kenchlow Station, because I think there's a lot of evidence that it was actually in Spencer County. The other thing that I kept seeing when I was doing this research is that someone would talk about these, like Gilson and some of the folks that have done early Kentucky history. They'd say, well, there might have been a place called Flynn Station in Spencer County. And I thought, and I couldn't find anything about Flynn. So bless Jake, whenever Don Carlin sends us the original deed, and it's right over there on that tea table over there. And so please, it's a copy of it. I want you to I put a few things out for you to look at. But what you see is that you've got, it wasn't Shepard that had the land warrant for here. It apparently was Peter Flynn. So that was very different than what I had been told and what I had sort of assumed, and everybody was saying, oh, it's all, this is all Shepard property. There's no doubt, Shepard had a lot of property. He had about 17,000 acres. And he owned property out in the Elk Creek area. He owned some toward Nelson County. He owned property in this area. But what we found out is that the warrant, whenever you read the deed that actually came to Thomas Carlin and Thomas Carlin to Jacob Yoder, that warrant is very clear that Peter Flynn had the warrant. The importance of that is that they keep talking about the Flynn settlement. And then you find out that Thomas Carlin sold the acreage to Richard Taylor, and that it also included the Flynn warrant. And so so I thought, this is amazing. You know, all these towns know their history. I don't think we know our history very well. And so one of the things that I hope that we can get done is that find out what stations did we have here, because there's a real sense of pride in a county when you know what your stations are. What were the earliest settlers here? I kept thinking, how did they get from Painted Stone Station, Shelby County, over to Bullet Station where the salt was? And whenever they were being attacked by the Indians, they must have gone down and eventually down Brashears Creek over to Salt River. But I think there were a number of stations. I think there were at least 2 stations here that had the very earliest settlers. So I really want us to look at that piece. I also want us to look at the Peter Flynn piece, and Mr. Carlin, Don Carlin, who is a descendant of Thomas Carlin that had this property. He thinks he has some of those key pieces, some documents that will show us who Peter Flynn was. And so from what I've been able to kind of figure out, I think he was a speculator like Shepard. I think he had warrants. And so he got his warrant. He actually sold those warrants then originally to Thomas Carlin. And Thomas Carlin is a fascinating guy. I mean, Thomas Carlin, whenever you start looking at him, he was one of the earliest folks to come into Kentucky. He was, as Sean mentioned, he was actually in John Floyd's survey team. And some of these people just keep coming and weaving in and out, and it's just amazing. So Thomas Carlin was surveying under John Floyd, and John Floyd was related to William Preston. And William Preston was a very astute businessman back in Virginia. And he had all this land, and he was speculating, and he was sending John Floyd out here to survey and to make sure that he knew what kind of land he had. And he then employed Thomas Carlin. And so you had both Daniel Boone and the Transylvania Company and Richard Henderson out here, but they were competing with the likes of William Preston and others. William Preston, actually, when he was the uncle of John Brown. And there is a connection to this house because John Brown was the son of a fellow that started what would eventually become Washington and Lee University. But they were, at the time, didn't have a lot of money. John Brown was struggling, and he was trying to go to Princeton. Then he went to William and Mary. He eventually did finally get through law school, or what was law school then, studied under Thomas Jefferson. And John Floyd sends the message back through his uncle, William Preston, and he said, through William Preston, he said, you need to tell John Brown he needs to get out here to Kentucky. There is all of this land. We've got to get these deeds perfected. He needs to quit studying under Thomas Jefferson and get to Kentucky, which he did. And as you know, he was a founding father, one of our founding fathers. He he moved to Danville originally, but then came on into Frankfort. Thomas Jefferson helped him design his home, and that became Liberty Hall. And Mary Yoder, the second daughter of Jacob Yoder, married Mason Brown, the son of John Brown. And I think about that girl. I think, here she is out here in the middle of nowhere. Her father probably had little to no education. He left home at 13 because his parents had divorced, and he was struggling. He takes these cattle and horses, and he's trying to sell them and go west. He finally joins the revolution, and with the militia. He joins the militia, and his militia unit gets attached to George Washington's army. But she was out here, and I think that's one of the interesting things about the library. When you see what they're reading, though, the type of things they're reading in Greek and Latin. They're reading all the classics. It's amazing. But still, she was out here in the middle of nowhere, and then suddenly you go to Frankfort, where your husband is the circuit judge, your father-in-law, and you're living with your father-in-law and mother-in-law. She was from New York City. Her father was a very well-to-do Presbyterian minister. her father was, has the friends of the likes of James Madison, James Monroe, all these folks. I can't imagine poor little Mary Yoder picking up and going to Frankfurt, and how difficult that must have been. They did say that she took two things, though, from Vaucluse when she went to live at Liberty Hall. And she took yellow lilies, and she took the yellow daffodils from here at Liberty Hall, or from here at Vaucluse, which are still blooming in the spring. And so I always think of her. Anyway, to me, there are so many unanswered questions. We need to figure out, what stations did we have? Where were they? Is actually Taylorsville Flynn's settlement? Is that the actual origins? Not Richard Taylor, and he took 60 acres and went to Shelbyville and said, let's get this approved. It actually started, I think, with the Flynn settlement that then became Taylorsville after Richard Taylor bought the land. And then who had the warrants here? Where are these 16,000 acres that Shepherd had, but what did Flynn have, and what was his role? So, I think there's so many unanswered questions that as I've gotten into this, you can really go down a rabbit hole quickly, as you might guess. But I also think they're really important things to know. And I think that they allow us to have a better understanding of place and an appreciation of place and pride in the county that we live in. So to me, those are very important. We particularly need to know, what's the history of Taylorsville? How did it start? Who started it? And because if you know those kinds of things, particularly as we're heading into the 250th anniversary, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, how much more pride can we have but the wonderful folks that came in here, with what they did to be able to perfect their deeds, and have that kind of pride of place. So I'm hoping that as we kind of take this journey together, head toward the America 250 and the 250th anniversary, that we will continue to look at these issues, work on them. Our little committee it's small but mighty. We only started out with 2 or 3 Revolutionary War soldiers. We're now up to 61. 61. It's amazing. All these cemeteries that have been, identified now, where you've got Revolutionary War soldiers, and as Terry says, we're going to move on to Civil War next. So this is going to go on and on. But I think it's very important for our county and to have a deeper sense of pride in where we came from, because we've got some really magnificent folks that were here, and their roles are just amazing. When you think about the inventor of the flatboat, the first person to go down the Ohio and the Mississippi and make a successful commercial venture down the Ohio and the Mississippi. Whenever you think about how this one person, how he impacted our country. It meant that you could now move goods, because when you were in Kentucky, you couldn't go across the mountain and sell anything. We were stuck out here. And all these different countries, Britain and France, were trying to keep us from using the rivers. He figured out how you could take that flatboat, put all this whiskey on it and other stuff, and make a successful trip down the river. Importantly, too, it allowed families to be able to settle west, because they would put like a little cabin on the top of the flatboat. They might have a little fireplace in there or something, but you put your cow and your horse, and you loaded the whole family up, and you head down the river. Even Lincoln talked about how fascinating it was to take a flatboat to New Orleans. So what this guy did, this is just one little person in Spencer County, but what he did and what a legacy he has. What a legacy he has. We should be so proud.
Tell me, so Jacob Yoder bought the house in 1801.
Mm-hmm.
And then
No. He bought the property. So the way this works.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, not the
okay.
house.
So the way this works is that 1784 date, you got the 1609. That's the whole contract. You got the double cross in 1763, but then the whole thing happens in 1780 when Virginia, as the Commonwealth, says we're selling land warrants to raise money. When that happens, land warrants got sold probably to Flynn and to Shepherd and to others. that 17,000 or 16,000 acres would be about 25 square miles, but it's around Shepherdsville and comes into this county, but it doesn't appear to be right here. This was Flint because of the deed that we have. It goes back to that 1780 period. Nothing could be sold before 1780 because Virginia enacted the law in September of 79. It became effective in 1780. So in 1780, all of a sudden, land warrants are sold. And then when the war is over and the Paris Peace Treaty is signed in 1783, that's why you don't see any movement on the land warrants until now it's officially over between the British and the Americans. Of course, it turned out it wasn't until 1812. But it was officially over for Virginia to be able to sell these warrants, and they'd be worth more money, because now if you have a land warrant, you can sell a segment of the land warrant to someone who wanted to perfect a deed. All a land warrant meant was you had the right to sell to others, divide it up how you want, and then sell to others so they could get a deed. The land did not belong to an individual until that individual built a house and put out a crop.
Like the cabin over here.
And so that cabin is the part of perfecting the deed. So the first time the deed's perfected is 1784, the land warrant sold. It's sometime between 1784 and 1791, because 1791, they've already issued the survey. So they've got the crop, they've got the cabin. So I don't know the date of the cabin. I imagine a few rocks got moved around in 84, 85. And I'm happy to take anyone who wants to go out with me to the cabin. It's what I've been working on for the last couple of years. And I can tell you it takes a long time to move a bunch of rocks around. But the issue is there were 8 Carlin boys, plus the girls, and Thomas Carlin, and they were Irish, and some Irish people have it in their genes to know how to lay rocks. And they did that, and they did the spring house. And I think they got started on the summer kitchen. But this brick structure, this was then built by Jacob Yoder in 1801. So 1801 to 3. The space underneath where we're sitting and standing is a full basement with a clay floor, but all the clay that was dug out of here was kilned right here on the property and made the bricks here. And the way the basement is structured, the foundation of the main part of the house, it's all stone all the way around, and it's got 2 large brick walls that hold up this wall and the other wall. So it's just 3 rooms under there, and it's exactly the footprint of this room, that foyer, and the women's parlor. And it's separated by 2 brick walls that are so thick. And the external is the rock. The top is the tulip poplar.
And Sean's gonna make it his man cave.
Do you see what I mean? How much information did we just get in a little over 30 minutes? It was an amazing experience. Thank you to the Spencer County Historical Society for allowing me to come to their meeting. Thank you so much to Sean and Vicki Gleason for opening up their home and sharing that amazing story with us, and for allowing me to bring it here to you guys to share it with you. So what a special moment. Obviously, we really love to cover local events that are going on, local companies and local organizations. Make sure you're aware of the great work that they're doing here in our county. But I think it's also really important that we know about our history. And when people can share it with us in an impactful way, in a way that keeps our attention, I think it's just something special that we need to pay attention to. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, give us a shout on our Facebook page, Small Town Pulse with Steve and Melissa, and let us know. And of course, if you have other topics, ideas, companies, organizations you'd love to hear from, let us know there as well. We'll see you next time.